Counselor Hadley,
Here.
Counselor Whitney,
Here.
Counselor Forcum,
Here.
Counselor Barenboim,
Here.
Counselor Hollett.
Here. Thank you. This meeting has been called to order as a special session per the request of 3 counselors. The purpose of this meeting is to discuss the current situation in the fire department as it regards to the safety and the citizens of Oakridge.
Kathy.
I know that you didn't get to sign in. There will be an opportunity for public comment. I ask that you just be patient because I'm going to ask you to raise your hands and go through it. And you will be asked, of course, to limit to 3 minutes as normal. So, and that will be just a little bit later on. So let me say a few remarks before we get started. This meeting is an important opportunity for the council as a group to hear about the matter that is occurring in our fire department. The community members are concerned about as well as council. While we all bring information to the table, I would ask that we each set aside what we think we know to critically listen to the presentations and to each other as we consider this important matter. I also want to be clear to the community that I have the utmost respect for the members of the volunteer fire department and the hours they provide and their willingness to provide important services to their neighbors. I want to specifically address the volunteers who have been dismissed. My respect for you is not diminished in any way because of not meeting the required number of trainings or drills, and it's absolutely not a reflection of your competency or your skills, but only a reflection on whether you met the guidelines of this particular department. Community members, I hope that you hear tonight information that relieves your worries about our fire and safety coverage. And last of all, members of the fire department in general, I hope that after this meeting you will understand that your council is behind you and wants the best for our community and respects what you do. So I'm going to ask Rick to read the agenda bill, please.
The agenda title is to discuss the current situation in the fire department in regards to the safety of citizens of Oakridge. So, staff report. The issue, several volunteers have failed to meet the Oakridge EMS and fire department requirements. Notices were sent out to advise them of potential dismissal for the volunteer program. Several volunteers failed to show up for required training or contacted the department to work out a way to meet requirements and were subsequently dismissed as a volunteer for the fire department. The lack of volunteers can be viewed as a potential risk to the safety of the citizens of Oakridge. A little background, the fire department has a history of volunteers. The program has always had required membership requirements. Those requirements are needed to provide an effective, trained, and cohesive responses to emergencies. Inactive members, or those not meeting the requirements, have long been an issue. While the city values the contribution of each volunteer, we also must recognize the need to make sure that adequate requirements are enforced to ensure the safety of all. Letters were sent to alert those who were lacking in requirements and a chance to remedy the situation, to allow individuals the chance to contact the fire chief for a possible course of action to maintain active status. While some chose to take advantage of this, some did not. Those who did not were sent letters that they had been dismissed as a volunteer. The practice of requiring training for volunteers does not only happen in the fire EMS department, but also exists in the volunteer reserve program in the police department. Lack of training for those individuals acting in the field can equally be a danger or risk to citizens by poorly understood techniques, not understanding how individuals are expected to interact, and the lack of knowledge of new or unused equipment. Furthermore, the lack of ability or lack of desire to meet said training can be viewed as insubordination that can ultimately put the citizens and the city at risk. We must separate emotional responses from this equation and put the safety of our citizens, paid staff, as well as volunteers first. Just as a coach will not allow a player who has not shown up to practices to play, we cannot allow volunteers who have not been active to participate. And just as a player will be removed from a team for not showing up repeatedly to practices, the city must also regrettably dismiss those who do not meet the requirements.
Thank you for reading that. So at this time, I'm going to ask Chief Hansen to do. You have a presentation, or you have some information you want to give us?
We do.
Okay. So, and how long will that take, you think? And do you need the lights off, lights down?
Lights down will be good.
Okay.
How long depends on the talk, and if there's any questions,
Okay.
feel free to interrupt. So make sure that,
If you have questions, please raise your hands.
Sure.
That way it'll give us a chance to go through it.
I don't know,
Greg, do we not turn on?
Oh, yeah.
John,
Rick, other way.
Yeah, put these right where
He just said something about it.
we could reverse that so that you can see this.
Those ones are, I believe, over there.
It's right there, Mike.
Oh.
we're.
Is that better?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for everybody for, showing up. I know that this is important to the community and, I think communication is important. And sometimes, as a fire chief, I may not communicate as well as I should, and sometimes as a community, you don't communicate to the fire department as well as we should. But hopefully, after tonight, we'll have at least an understanding of where we're at and how we got where we're at. And from there, we can always build from that. You have a SWOT that needs to be sent out. So go ahead to the next one. We're here to talk about the fire department in regards to the safety of the citizens of Oakridge, and that's always our important part for the organization, as well as the safety of the members. If the members aren't safe, we can't help and do the situation what we're doing. It's a wide or a complex question as far as the safety of the city of Oakridge as far as it relates to the organization. And we're gonna break it down into 3 different areas. We're gonna talk about the volunteer requirement, which we've already kind of discussed it a little bit, and that's on everybody's forefront or on their mind. And we're gonna look at the last 6 months as it relates to alarm activity and volunteer response data to help all of us get on the same foundation as far as where we're at and why these things are requirements. So going back a little bit, just to bring us forward to where we got, go ahead to the next one, is we put together a SWOT analysis in 2015. And what that is, for some of you that may not be familiar, is the group comes together, and in this case, it was the volunteers and paid staff. And we talked about the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the challenges of the organization, and we did this in 2015. I pulled some of those out that relate to what we're talking about today, and so we'll cover those real briefly. The strengths that were identified by this group are the opportunities that are often to members, which were membership and training, and the ability to increase our training levels. The weaknesses that were identified by the group was accountability, liabilities, which is the inadequate training and the lack of dedication, the additional training availability, and not having a standalone training officer. The training officer at the time was also on shift, which made some issues, and poor drill attendance. Under opportunities during this group, Paul?
What about leadership? Why isn't it on there for weaknesses?
It was addressed in the SWOT analysis. There was actually quite a few things that were addressed, but we're talking about training and response tonight, and that's why that was all that I brought up. We have the whole list of items that were listed on there as well, which you're more than willing to have copies of that if you'd like that.
10 out of the 12 10 out of the 12 fire department personnel that I talked to, I interviewed for a report, all indicated that the problem with the fire department is the leadership of the interim chief.
Okay, well, let's address what we're being presented with here, not
So,
anything else.
opportunities back in 2015 were none that were identified for what we're talking about tonight. We're staying focused, if we could, on the training and the response. Some of the challenges that were brought up under the volunteers were training, proficiency, and participation. Accountability was training, and then follow through, or the lack thereof. So from that, I presented a hybrid membership requirement, and this is actually something that was developed in another organization that I worked at. When you're dealing with volunteers, or actually anybody for that matter, is you've got some that, and what we heard in the SWOT analysis is that people were showing up on scene that they haven't seen for months, so they weren't trained. And then we had some individuals that all they would do is go to training, but never show up on the scene. So what we want as a community and individuals is we want well-trained individuals responding to help us when we're in need. So from that, I presented this, and I know it's hard to read, so I broke it down. And the requirements were broken down into just the two things that I just talked about: alarm response and training. So the first two slides are dealing with alarm response. I'm sorry. So back in 2015, we presented this matrix here, and we'll talk about the column on the left first. Is a membership, you had to make 40 alarms, or sometimes you see the word calls up there, same thing, in a quarter or in 3 months. And then it worked its way down. One of the things about all of us is we have other things pulling at us for our time and those kinds of things. As an organization, you try to be flexible enough to where you meet the needs of the organization and the level of service that you're providing, but at the same time, we need to talk about each of us as individuals and all the other things that pull at us, so we can have a balance, which comes into cruise shifts. Basically, cruise shifts are a way that a member can let the on-duty crew know, because one of the things that we've heard about during the SWOT analysis is the stress back in 2015. We had one paid person that would come on, and he wouldn't know if he had somebody there to respond with them. And if you're providing an ALS ambulance and you're coming in and you're not sure if you even got a crew, that adds additional stress. So that was one of the things that we looked at. But back to the cruise shifts, what that is as a volunteer, I could call the station, let them know that for the next 4 hours, 8 hours, if you get a call, I'm gonna go, but I'm not gonna be at the station. I could be home cutting my grass, I could be doing whatever. That value, or your time has value to that. And so what we've done is tied value to the commitment that you made by letting the crew know that I'll be out doing things, but if you get a call, I'm gonna respond. And so the next one, this here, happens to be here, is how we,
Can I ask Dawn?
oh, go ahead.
That's okay.
Yeah, on that previous slide, my question is, does the, do the two columns correlate? So in other words, if you only went on 12 alarms, but you also did 12 cruise shifts, then you have completed the amount that's
Correct.
necessary.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
You're correct, you're spot on. So going back to putting value to your time and your commitment to the organization, is the way we broke it down. So if you said that I'm gonna be available for 4 hours, that was worth a quarter of a cruise shift. And then it broke itself way down. And at the end of the quarter, you would have X amount of cruise shifts. So if we go back to Dawn's question, if I had 12 cruise shifts, then I don't have to have any responses. And the idea with that is if you committed to the organization and said that I'm gonna be there for 12 cruise shifts, the odds are you're gonna run on calls. So that was the intent of that. Dawn?
So then also, would signing up for a regular, for a shift be considered
Cruise shift,
a
yes.
cruise shift? Okay.
Well, it depends on what you mean by sign, because we have stipend shifts also, which is a little different. If you go to the next one. So a stipend shift, so you got a cruise shift where I say I'm gonna be available for the next 24 hours. I'm gonna be at home doing whatever I'm doing, but if you get a call, I'm gonna respond. That's worth, I said 24 hours, that's worth two shifts on what we look there. On a stipend shift, that's a little different, and that's where you sign up and you're actually either the driver, or usually they're the driver, and depending on the week, we have one slot available for a cruise shift, or excuse me, for a stipend shift, or the weekends we'll have 2, and on Friday we'll have 2. So those, there's difference. And on the stipend, the volunteer gets reimbursed $100 per stipend shift.
So
And
that,
stipend shift means that you are at the station, not that you're
Well,
just
that's,
available.
I mean, again, we're volunteers, so
Right.
the intent is that you'll be at the station roughly from 8 to 4,
Okay,
or whenever there's calls. But that doesn't mean that, and we've had volunteers do that they've got things going on. They come in, they check out their equipment, make sure things are going, and they gotta go home and do something and stuff like that. So you gotta be flexible with that, and we have been doing that before. Steve, did you have a question?
I just was wondering how you can force volunteers to do mandatory shifts and then fire them if they don't do that. That's.
First off, we don't mandatory volunteers to
You are
do
forcing
shifts.
them. You just showed me that list where you showed the mandatory. And you're basically saying that if you don't respond to this amount of calls or do this amount of shifts, you're fired. That's mandatory. That's
Okay.
not
The
volunteer.
There's a-
requirements to be a member is correct.
That is training requirements set up by the state. That's all.
And we'll
We'll
go
talk
through.
about that.
All right.
We're not different from a lot of other organizations when it comes from that. And, okay, go ahead, Paul.
So if it's not mandatory to be there from 8 to 4 on the stipend shift, then how come when Tim Whitaker was still here, one of the volunteers got wrote up for being late?
Each lieutenant was given their own shift. And as a volunteer, we're kind of getting off track here a little bit.
Yeah.
But as a volunteer, you choose to sign up with who you want to work with. Example, you and Melissa work predominantly with Scott. That's your choice. And as volunteers, you get to do that. Now, how Scott runs his shift with you guys is between you guys. So each lieutenant runs it a little differently. And that was back at the beginning, and there were some adjustment periods. And this whole program has really only been going since 2016 for us. So there's been some adjustments in that. But the intent is that you're there from 8 to 4, but that doesn't necessarily always happen. Chrissy?
So you just told me that the shift lieutenants are not consistent. One of them can require one thing and another lieutenant can require something totally different.
Yes, I did say that, because each lieutenant runs their shift. There's parameters, you know this, being in the fire service, as long as you have that. You can have all the requirements in the world that you want, and each officer is going to interpret it the way that they want to interpret it. You get some officers that they like to train a lot. And so when you're working on their
Right.
shift, you know that they're going to be training a lot. And then you've got some that like to do building maintenance or something like that.
Let's
So,
Go ahead and keep going on. You need to get through
Well,
this.
okay.
So it's okay, and you're doing great, so hold on to your questions, guys.
Okay, so that gives you kind of a brief synopsis of crew shifts and how there's value to your time. And this is what I presented in 2015. So after talking about it with the group, forgot training, I'm getting ahead of myself. So we also talked about, because training is very important, you need to be ready. 7 drills in a quarter. If everything goes as planned, which back at this time it wasn't going as planned, but the idea is that you would have 12 opportunities or 12 drills in a quarter, and you had to meet 7 of them with the idea that approximately 2 hours per drill. That didn't always happen. And that was one of the weak points in our organization. Because of the way our system was set up, and our on-duty paramedic was the one doing the training, because we didn't have a designated training officer, there was times when people would show up, the person's gone on a medical aid or on a call, and there was no drill.
Okay, there's a question here. Go ahead.
So can you tell me that you have been to EMS drill with me and you know the quality of
That's
the
not the
drills that
purpose of
were?
this meeting, whether or not he attends or not. The purpose is to explain to the
Well,
community how these
do
drills
you
work.
know
Continue, Mike.
The
Please.
quality?
Please be quiet. Go ahead and continue.
Okay, so back to the training,
Okay.
was 7 drills, 2 hours per drill, 14 hours per quarter is what that worked out to be. So after discussing it, this is what we came up with, and instead of going through all of this again, what I've done is highlighted in red the changes from the previous requirement, because we've adjusted this, I think 3 or 4 times. So from what I presented to what we implemented was instead of 40 calls per quarter, we went to 30. Next one, please. We added the 24-hour 2 shifts for members other than before, because it was just that stipend. Yes.
Wherever you were when you got this set up, how many calls did they average per month, day, year?
I think there were 2,000,
So double.
which was one of the reasons we adjusted, is the opportunity for our members versus what was up there. So, going on to the next one. So again, January 1st, this is what was being presented, is we added to the training section, portion of it was to help get instructors, because we're relying on our paid staff, is if there was a lead instructor, they would get credit for half a shift, or a part-time instructor, or an assistant instructor would get credit for a quarter shift. Now the shifts, what we're talking about here, is back to the crew shifts, because we're not reducing the amount of hours for training, because that is important. So that was there. So I put out a memo on January, I can't read it,
January 18th to 16th.
saying that effective January 1st, that this is our requirements and this is what we're going to use going forward. We let this play out for 3 months, and then we made a change. Go ahead and go to the next one. So on April 1st, after letting that play for 3 months, we made some changes. I'll give it to you in just a second. So what we did is we increased the value of crew shifts in your time. Next one, please. We also, instead of just having Monday night drills as part of those 7, is we opened it up to allowing for business meetings. We thought that was important. And these other different types of training, so that you were able to get your 7 drills without just doing Monday. So from there, we had 6 months into play. We had a committee that was the volunteer president, which happened to be Chrissy. We had a recruit retention officer, which was Cody, and we had, at the time, the training officer, Captain Howell. They put together a report, which was actually a very good report.
We actually had more people than just that.
Okay, all I'm doing is looking at this, okay. So, from that, this is their report, and I highlighted some stuff that is very important to the change in the direction we were headed, and they were spot on with this. And
Mike, can we let Chrissy say your question?
oh, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Go ahead.
So I just have like a 2-part question. So it looks like for the average person here, we might not understand like your shifts, your stipends, your whatever drills, but it looks like it's forever kind of evolving and changing. You're saying you're always adapting it. How does that rank towards what our state average for requirements
Good question.
stacks up?
And we'll get to that. So we are in line with a lot of those. The only area that I would say that 14 hours per quarter would supersede what you would call a state requirement would be dealing with EMS. And EMS is on a 2-year recertification. And, you know, for example, EMR, which is what I am, I've got 12, in 2 years, I only have to train for 12 hours. So my question, I guess, to the community and talk about your safety, do you want somebody coming in and help treating you on an EMS type of call that's only trained for 12 hours in a year? So,
Let me make
so
sure I
those are the
understand
issues.
what you're saying. So everything, all the other training requirements that we have in place are less, are not any greater than Oregon standards.
I've got a slide that will show that.
Except for,
Yeah.
okay,
Okay, I'll get,
except for that one. So when we get to that slide,
I will answer that question.
okay, all right. And who's Brenna? Hi,
Brenna.
Brenna.
Hi.
Go ahead.
I just, when you made these changes, were they directed down to your lieutenants, training officers,
recruitment retention
Well,
officer.
these were all made
Well,
with
I can tell
everybody.
you, I
yes.
joined in May of 16, and I had the 40 hours required. The business meetings, the other things did not count towards my required. And
I
that was
would-
in my binder,
Okay, well, it shouldn't have been 40 hours because that was never
the
implemented.
40 calls. My
I mean, the
apologies.
40 calls, that was never implemented.
I'm just
It was-
saying, none of these last slides with your red highlights
Yeah,
were
so,
in my,
without having Cody
binder.
here to talk about your binder and that, I really don't want to get into individual
no, and you
because
really
I
can't.
can't do that right now.
But you didn't answer my question, was this relayed down to your lieutenants,
Yes,
training
it
officers?
was related
give it
to
everybody else?
everybody, yes.
Go ahead. What's
Paul?
your-
Back this slide, it says pump operator. I took that class and they never finished it. So I was never certified as a pumper operator.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Chrissy?
So, your hours for EMS, you're not including actual work hours where they're on a call, where
No,
for our members, one transport is 3 hours. So for instance, if somebody has 30 some odd hours for 2 years is what they need for their EMTI certification, 36 hours, there is also 3 hours on every transport that they've got, well, actually more like an hour and a half. Patient care time on at the site and patient care in the ambulance that also should be included to these people's proficiency.
at this point, the requirements that we have, on calls for our training is not counted. Because when you're dealing with the state, they do allow for, there's a slide that talks about requirements for a state firefighter. Basically, it's 60 hours for basic firefighter, and you can either get that with 60 hours or you get a combination of ways. And what Chrissy's talking about, that could be a way to do that. Again, it comes back to organization and training for our personnel, how we train, and working together as, let's go ahead and go back to where we were so we can keep moving. Go ahead.
Next one.
Did you read that? Go ahead.
As you know, the Department and Volunteer Association has adopted their membership attendance policy that was proposed in early January 2016. The policy you proposed has addressed many of our concerns, and we feel strongly to support it the best we can. First and foremost, inactive members are a risk to our safety and pose a potential liability. We find ourselves unable to do our jobs adequately when we are doubting our partners' knowledge or skills. Having untrained members responding or participating in emergency operations is a lawsuit waiting to happen. The days of just having names on a roster are long gone. We are about quality, not quantity. We need to depend on every one of our members to have the same minimum training and participation that has been set forth. This is not an area we believe that we can waver on.
And so the next paragraph, let me go ahead and finish this one. I can come back to it. Next paragraph, they addressed PPE or personal protective equipment. Concern there was if you have inactive members who have gear and you've got new members coming in, or the inactive member may have gear that's better than the active member, that gear is not available. I'll get to you, honest.
I'll wait, raise my
Okay,
hand until
next
you're
one.
ready.
We're in the process of changing our culture and setting the bar higher. We need every single member in our organization to adhere by our membership expectation policy. If we do not, the policy is invalid, and those of us who are trying to implement it loses credibility.
Go ahead.
So I can explain to the people here, this portion, all this, I was a part of developing that. That was a group of people that wrote that. And I do believe most of it's true. However, I'm gonna say, Mr. Hanson has provided us a packet here of people that we had on the department at the time who had only been to 2 events in 2 years. People that we had not seen an entire year. These people here are in no comparison. Paul and Melissa over here, they are some of the top responders. You can't argue that, right? They're in no comparison to what you're talking about up there.
What I'm trying to share is where the organization was, the philosophy of the organization, which we all still believe in, and where we're going. So, go ahead and do the next slide, please. And so, summary of that report, there were 19 members were identified with an action plan, and some of them, you're absolutely correct. When you start a new program and you're trying to change a culture, there's a lot of just names on a list, if you will, that need to be cleaned up. And so in that report, 9 recommendations for termination. I don't use the term termination. To me, termination is you terminate an employee, volunteers, you dismiss, because it's not an employment issue. That's my opinion. The committee planned to meet with 7 members, which is similar to what I offered. And out of the 8, I had 3. And the committee asked me to meet with 3 members, which I did. So what we're doing in this process that brought everybody here is really no different than what we did back there. And this was an excellent report. It was well done.
You felt it necessary to delegate to your lieutenants the policy and the other part of the training commitment. Well, why not delegate to your lieutenants to meet with their, you said like Paul and Melissa and Renee, and then they like to work better with Scott. Why not delegate to Lieutenant Hoggett the fact that he needs to meet with those reserve members and tell them up and bring them up to standard? I think that would have probably worked better.
It may have, but the 7 members that the committee identified that they were going to meet with, they felt that they had either a rapport or that was part of the recruit retention officer's position requirements to do that. The 3 members that they wanted me to meet with, the committee wanted me to meet with them. That was their recommendation to me. It's interesting that you said that, because I did something similar to what you're talking about with the letter that went out telling them that they're on probation and that they could meet with me, actually delegating the area of their responsibility, just what you're talking about. And it actually offended one of our members in that they felt that should come from me. So it depends on where you're at and who you are on how you want to receive that information. And we've got some area to grow as it requires as an organization and our leadership in a lot of different levels.
Again, you're comparing people that go on a lot of calls that have current certifications. These people here, I see lost certification. I see hasn't been seen in 2 years. I see has been on 1 call in 1 year. These are not those people.
And I mentioned that when we are started a new program, that there's going to be people on a list that need to be cleaned off. And I'm not comparing those people with
Then
the
you probably
5.
shouldn't have given us a list of those people that's in our packet.
I gave you the report that was given to me,
A
and it
list
was
of
well
people.
done.
Okay.
Thank you. Let's move on. Okay, so bringing us forward a bit, in October of 2018, back to somebody had mentioned call volume. Because we don't run as many calls as the department was that I originally presented, we reduced it from 30 down to 20. Next, please. And one of the things that we noticed is that we were talking about 7 drills per quarter. And what we found out, or what, as we rode with this, is I could have done a drill or been in a drill, and it was 30 minutes, and it's counted as a drill. Eric could have been in a drill that was 3 hours, and it counted as a drill. So when you're looking at drills, I got 1 drill, he got 1 drill, but the intent was 14 hours, and that was always the intent. So in October of 2018, we went away from calling it drills and calling it hours, because that's what was important. We also did away from having just those 1 areas that counted as drills that we looked at earlier, to where we opened it up so that there was more opportunity for people to train.
Dan Barkley.
I think your hand was up first. Go ahead.
Just a quick question. Go back a slide. Now, that 20 on your alarms, unless I've gone senile or whatever, started at 40 down to 30 down to 20.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
The training requirement
Stayed the same.
stayed the same. So you've had the alarms that they have to respond to be active and kept the training required, got half as many alarms that they need to respond to in the same degree of training for half as many alarms?
Well, now we're getting into a philosophy about training, and is 14 hours in emergency services enough training for our members to respond to?
Well, the state of Oregon says it is.
We'll get to the training, and look at our neighbors, which was a question about, is 14 hours too much? We'll look at that.
Excuse me. One thing I noticed about all of this is that it seems like there's a huge gap between April of 16 and October of 18.
Because we were using the system that was in play, and then we adjusted it.
But so during that time, from April of 16 to October of 18, there were no issues with people meeting the requirements?
There were issues, that's why we adjusted it.
We recognize Melissa.
Melissa?
Can you tell me when you guys decided to enforce the prior training requirements that we were put on probation for on October 13th?
It was actually-
When were we told that you were gonna start enforcing those? Because as you just stated, and I know very well, there was a lot of people that did not meet these requirements for close to 2 years. And then all of a sudden, we were on probation.
It actually wasn't all of a sudden, and it was actually the quarter back before this,
I know.
where we did, actually 2 quarters before, where, and I think it was Cahill, she had mentioned that it was a week into that quarter when that was brought up, as far as her not meeting the requirements, and so we adjusted it and gave everybody kind of a free pass, if you will, during that quarter, we can live in this one.
But what I'm asking is, when did you put out a communication to the rest of the department that our free pass was gone?
I don't think
Before
we've
we were put on
never
probation.
said that we,
Why
had
weren't
a-
people put on probation before that? That were obviously not meeting the standard.
because we were adjusting the requirements, and then when we got to the point where you were put on probation, regardless of whether we communicated it or we didn't communicate it.
That's a big deal.
That's a big
That's a
deal.
big
Okay.
deal.
Let me-
Wait.
Nice try.
Wait.
We all knew that we were working on requirements since 2015. You had 3 months as a group that we're talking about to meet the 14 to 20, which we all were working on. So-
Christie, go ahead.
I'll let these guys go first.
I just have to state really quickly, you stated a few minutes ago that we're working on quality versus quantity, but I disagree, because when I was told I wasn't meeting the requirement, I was given 4 hours of Wisconsin EMS training protocols and curriculum to watch these 4 videos. How does that help my training and make me a more competent EMT? There was a push to get everybody's hours in, regardless of whether they were quality or not, and
There was an opportunity to expand your opportunity to get the training so that you could meet it. I mean, there's,
I'm gonna interrupt here just for a
okay,
moment,
go ahead.
because, while I know that this is personal, and while I know that this is, touches home, at the same time, council is not here to determine individuals' status. That is truly against why we're here and what we do. Unfortunately, we all have our own, or fortunately, all have our own opinions, but we really can't delve into individuals. Why was this individual this? Why was this? Excuse me, we're talking about training standards, and I appreciate how you've stuck to the training standards. Does this count for this? Training standards have gone down, crew shifts have gone up, or whatever.
The training
So let's
standards
be-
hasn't gone down.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
well, okay. So let's just be careful that we don't delve into the personal, because we can't do that as a council. And if that, excuse me,
Really big?
excuse me.
Time out. Let's focus on.
Let's focus on what we're doing. Hey, are you listening, everyone? Because I will just stop the meeting, because this can get very contentious. So let's keep it on where we need to be talking and on the level. Please, you all have a level of expertise that is important for us to hear. But we do need to keep it on a non-personal level, okay?
Communication,
Chrissy.
management problem.
So, one question I had was, we never really got to what the state standard was compared to your standard, but if the hours that you were trying to reach eventually got to 14, you said, I don't understand why, as a citizen, why it wouldn't count that somebody who shows up to like an EMT shift or whatever shift, they actually show up every day and go on calls, why those hours wouldn't be counted towards the 14, because I personally, if somebody in my family had a medical emergency, I would want the guy who shows up every day, even though according to you, he doesn't have the 14 hours yet, rather than the guy who shows up and just watches a movie. That doesn't make any sense. The hands-on training seems like it would be much more critical a training than just watching a film or going over a drill where it's not really like in real life time.
I think that's a legitimate question.
So, and it is. The quality of training obviously is important, and when you do training on some areas, it's mundane. I mean, it's the same stuff over and over, and I give you that. Back to response, it's not been in, this is the response. So if you're required to be a member to be going to calls, you're gonna be getting some of that, but on top of that, you need to have, when you have a call, you don't have control totally of what the training is, if that's what you're using
Well,
for
I'm just
training.
saying,
Let me finish, answer your question. And so, you can't use that by itself. I'm not saying that in the future, maybe we adjust it and we figure out a way to do that. Right now, we don't have that. Back to showing up for shift and going on calls. That was an issue we ran into. And one of the issues we ran into is we had, she mentioned Paul and Melissa. I don't wanna,
Please.
when you have opportunity to train, you take those opportunities to do that. And it's up to all of us to be responsible to do some of that stuff. And when we know that we have our requirements and we have time to do that, then we should do that. And I think I'll leave it at that.
I was just thinking, but if you
in
have
the future
people who
there might-
actually show up and are actually like doing resuscitation or watching resuscitation, I'd rather see us as a city decide that those hours are critical hours where they're actually doing the hands-on work would be much more valuable than, as you're saying, going by a different state standard.
I'm not disagreeing that they're, going on calls, that is the best training that you can do. When you're on the fire side of it, dealing with live fire training, even
Then
though
why
it's
doesn't
training.
it count if it's the most valuable?
I think he's answered your question, that in the future, maybe it will, it
Was it you,
doesn't
Scott?
count.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that you and I had this conversation before, but one of the concerns that I had with the way that we changed the training requirement going from number of drills that you attended to an hour number, we required 14 hours. The way with that we were running our drills, if you did strictly EMS, you could only get a maximum of 14.5 hours per quarter. And most of our drills, especially EMS drills, run maybe an hour, sometimes an hour and a half. We have a holiday on a Monday and the drill would be canceled for that day. So there was no possible way that even if a person came to every single EMS drill, that they could attain 14 hours.
And we recognize that, and that's why we opened it up to where those 14 hours, when you've got people on your shift, and they're there from 4 to 8, I don't know if there's anybody in the room that's more qualified to teach EMS than you. You've got a captive audience, if you will, from 8 o'clock till 4 o'clock that you can teach them. So if they're not making it on the Monday because of whatever the circumstance, the crew's gone, it's a holiday, They had to be gone. There's no reason that we can't take responsibility for ourselves and train while we're there at the station, kind of back what she was talking about.
But so only those people that signed up on a regular basis would have that opportunity. And
No, that's not
some
true.
people-
That's
some
not
people
true,
don't
Scott.
have that.
Because people can come down on Saturday, they can come on Sunday, they can come anytime and put on training. And that's why we went to this standard. I need to move forward.
Yeah, and I'm gonna interrupt here just for a minute because, and you do need to move forward, and I appreciate you all, you have great questions. But it seems to me that what I'm hearing people asking questions who are part of a fire department. And I'm getting the feeling that you didn't ask these questions when this was implemented, or didn't know.
That's why I'm going through the process that we went through.
So that's why
All
I'm
of this
asking.
is not new to anybody.
So this is October 1st, 2018, and there's questions about how you're counting hours. Do you have a regular opportunity, does your department have a regular opportunity to review those hours and say this isn't working? Because obviously it's a work in progress for the last 3 years. It seems like there needs, I'm seeing a disconnect here.
Well, I'm gonna
Okay.
put our training officer kind
Okay.
of on the spot here and talk about, training hours. And we actually got the recruit retention person here also. We did reach out, to those, looking at this last scenario. And when we got to where, we had some folks that needed more training hours, so we did try to expand their opportunity, to get those hours.
Chrissy, you had something to say?
I can answer your question. We started this when he came in as interim fire chief, and
Give me,
he
so that was
proposed,
2000,
it was
15.
January of 2016, actually.
Is when this started.
Is
Yeah,
when you
correct.
sat us down. He came to this proposal with myself, Kurt Smith, Shannon, and Mike Cameron. Mike Cameron was very much opposed to it. I was on the fence. Kurt was opposed to it, but we agreed collectively that we would support him because he was our new chief and we wanted to support him. We did want change. We wanted the inactive people. It wasn't working, and I'm talking inactive people by people we didn't see for a year, an entire year, and then show up on a call.
Right.
People, it's not the same as these people. We did his plan, it didn't work. He adjusted it. Cody Frank was keeping track of the numbers. 6 months, it still didn't work. Cody Frank adjusted it again. Another 6 months, it still didn't work. Cody Frank left, I believe, and it was left by the wayside. At that point, it
that would have
wasn't,
been 2016. Give me a time frame. How far are we now?
I would say it was about early 2017 that
Okay.
Cody left.
Alright.
And you can ask these people over here. The
No, I'm-
training requirements kind of was left by the wayside. We didn't have reports on training anymore. It wasn't at the same requirement. It just kind of dropped off. Then suddenly October, correct me if I'm wrong over here, people. Suddenly October 18, they all get mails that they're on, letters in the mail that they're on probation. I'm sorry, it is not coincidental that these people received letters that they're on probation because they politically spoke out against Mr. Hansen. That is what I believe.
Whistleblower clause.
Hey,
Wait, yes.
it is not a
Speaking.
coincidence.
Thank you for your opinion.
Thank you, that is my opinion.
Okay. And
We
you're
go on.
very right, so please go on.
Okay, so, next slide. So, one of the things that currently we did is when you go back and you were looking at all those numbers between 20 calls or alarms and the cruise shifts, it was kind of confusing to look at the cruise shifts. Because if there's, it said 3 cruise shifts, you reduced your call volume by X amount. Well, if I did a cruise shift that was 4 hours and Eric did a cruise shift that was 24 hours, we both got credit for a cruise shift, and it made it kind of confusing, although that wasn't the intent, because each one of those were supposed to be worth 8 hours. So what we did is we got rid of all of that, we added the cruise shift hours in the map and put 96 hours. So what that means is that if you get 96 hours of cruise shift, in other words, you've told the department that you're gonna be available regardless of where you're at, 96 hours in a quarter, you don't have to respond to any calls. And the idea of that, and the reason for that is if you're committing to the department that you're gonna respond in 96 hours over that 3-month period, you're gonna go on calls. And going on calls is kind of why we do what we do. We train, so when we get on scene, we can be efficient.
So these red numbers are red?
Red or
is
new.
Another change?
This is the latest change.
So as late as January, we've made another change?
And all this is, it's, the requirement hasn't changed, it's just how we're presenting it, so
Okay.
it makes it cleaner. And actually what this allows somebody to do is, before we were showing 4 and 8, and those were kind of your benchmarks of what your crew shifts were, but we have people that, I'm gonna be available for 2 hours, or I'm gonna be available for 6 hours. Something outside of that, so all we do is, at the end of the quarter, we count up all of their crew shift hours, not number of crew shift, their hours, divided by 8, and that's how you get something between 0 and 96.
Is this method retroactively applied to everybody then, too? I mean,
This doesn't change what we've done
It
before.
hasn't changed,
No,
just a
it's just a
different
different
way
way
of
of
looking at
looking at it.
the number. Okay, got it.
Go ahead. So, back to what we talked about, I presented 40, we agreed on 30, and we're at 20. As far as the training, hasn't changed. Although the first 2 that are in red were considered 7 drills, the idea is get 2 hours of drill, so it was 14 hours, and then 14 hours on 2018 is when we went to hours and away from drills.
Okay.
Go ahead. So the question came up about, well, our requirements are stringent, more stringent than our neighbors and other departments in the area. So I asked Eric to do a survey. This was done in January. You can't read it, but I broke it down for the top ones. Go ahead and go to the next one, please. So looking at training, ours is 14 hours. Dexter is 18 hours. Lowell and South Lane both have 12, but in their requirement back on that sheet, they had a low and a high, and I'm not sure why they did that. So what I represented at the 12 was the low end of their requirements. So for these agencies, this is the training requirements per quarter for each agency.
And where is that, where are we on that?
We
We're
are the first one. We're the
Okay.
first one. Oh. Never mind. Go
These
ahead.
are also excluding South Lane, these are non-transport agencies that don't have, so they're non-transport agencies. So for instance, Oakridge's members have the time on transport to have that training and time with the patient, whereas some of these other departments do not have that because they don't have any.
But we don't count that, right?
He doesn't.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
The back to, like LFA, those that do transport, their requirements are a little different, that it's like 60 hours, or 60% of the calls are drills, or 75% of the drills. I think Lane, Fire Authority, I think was the one that it's 40 hours per year. And if you, I'm going off the top of my head, I'll give you wrong.
Dan Barkley,
Looking,
you wanna say something?
go ahead, I'm sorry.
Just real quick, the areas that you're comparing it to, a couple of points, and I'm not sure about South Lane, but you're talking places that are half the distance to a major medical facility than Oakridge is. And our numbers compare, but I'm kind of curious, we have a town of 3,200 people. What's the population of these other, and Dexter is more rural than urban than we are, and Lowell, I think, is a touch over 1,000, so their population's a little bit less. But Goshen, Pleasant Hill, South Lane, Dexter, what's the population of those areas that are half the distance from Riverbend that we are?
I don't know the population off the top of my head.
Well, I guess what
so,
I'm saying.
but what you're
compared to
building-
training hours, if you've got much more populated areas, with something half the distance, you're not really talking apples to apples comparing our training hours to anybody else, and
And
we
you're
don't
actually
live
building-
anybody else if we're talking about the safety of Oakridge citizens.
And you're actually building the case for more training hours. Because what you just said is we're further away, so our people need to be better than these other.
Well, they're getting
But
training.
that's a philosophy thing.
Steve?
And actually, what you just said was great. I like the fact that you said that between 4 and 8, that Scott can train the people on a shift, because that should apply to that. Because every time they transport an ambulance, and Scott's in that ambulance training 2 people, a driver and a EMT, that EMT and that driver should get the training to and from Eugene for the entire trip, because they're training with the training officer. Just like OJT for a police officer, when that police officer works with another FTO, that training, all those training hours for that police officer all count.
So that's
Through
a statement of what you would
DPSSD,
like
they
to
all
see
count
changed.
through DPSSD, and as a
Okay.
former training officer for the police department, I know that to be the case.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Yeah, you had your, did you wanna say something?
I do.
Go ahead.
I'm a citizen of Oakridge.